Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I move the amendment. This Parliament unanimously passed the UNCRC bill on the 16th of March 2021, based on our then understanding of the devolution settlement under the Scotland Act. The Section 6 compatibility duty was intended to extend to all devolved functions. The UK Government chose to refer the bill to the Supreme Court before it could receive royal assent. Although we fully respect the judgment, the Scottish Government was disappointed that in October 2021 the Supreme Court found that Section 6 was out with the Scottish Parliament's legislative competence. While I'm disappointed that the scope of the compatibility duty is far less than we had originally hoped it could be, I am pleased to now bring forward amendments back for this bill to be reconsidered. I urge members across Parliament to give these amendments the same support as you did during the original bill. The principle remaining that we want Scotland to be the best country in the world for children to grow up. I want to emphasise that, even with those changes, the bill remains an important step forward. It will provide legal protection for children's rights that is not currently available in Scotland or any other part of the UK. We should also remember that, although the sections of the bill impacted by the Supreme Court judgment are powerful provisions, there are other important provisions in the bill that will mean that children's rights are respected in the first place, and that will help to ensure that our statute book is fully compliant with the UNCRC requirements. The bill requires Scottish ministers to set out and report on how they are giving further and better effect to children's rights, regardless of whether the compatibility duty applies, and for the listed authorities to prepare and publish similar reports. The bill requires the Scottish Government, when bringing forward any new Scottish legislation, to make a statement about its compatibility with the UNCRC requirements and to carry out a children's rights and wellbeing impact assessment for decisions of a strategic nature. The more limited scope of the compatibility duty means that it is even more important to create a lasting cultural change about children's rights. And I'm confident that we can deliver this as a result of the wider support that we're putting in place. This includes a model child-friendly complaints process that can be used regardless of whether the compatibility duty applies, and the wide range of support, training and guidance for public authorities on how to take a child's rights approach.
I feel genuinely blessed that in this place to pass this legislation today and therefore enshrine children's rights into Scots law, my colleagues have that power in them today, and our children and young people are watching with open hearts, as am I. The general principles of the UNCRC state non-discrimination, acting in the best interests of the child, and the right not only to survival but development, and the right to be heard. The old expression of children being seen and not heard should finally be confined to the dustbin as we look to the future. Educator and author Jess Lair put it, children are not things to be moulded, but they are people to be unfolded.
Consideration work in recent weeks. I am especially grateful to those organisations that work directly with children and young people and were able to bring their voices into our reconsideration work. The Stage 3 debate on this bill in the last parliamentary session was a model of cooperation, rightly described by John Swinney as, and I quote, a landmark moment in the Scottish Parliament's history. We might not quite have managed that again today, but I think we share a serious commitment to making this bill as robust and comprehensive as possible. The Supreme Court judgment was, of course, deeply disappointing, and the attitude of the Westminster Government, both intransigent and petty, sadly, something we've come to expect. If there were one issue, just one, about which they could resist their playing their constitutional culture war games, you would think it would be the welfare of children. But no. So it is going to be more difficult than it would have been, but that does not lessen the significance of what we are doing today. Fortunately, children themselves can set us a good example of making the best of what we have. No one on the committee will, I think, forget the vivid image which Juliet Harris of Together passed on to us from the children she works with, and others have already mentioned it. But I think it's worth repeating, because in that metaphor, a Halloween web represented protections for children's rights, with buzzing flies as potential breaches. The Cabinet Secretary is, I hope, as delighted to be designated Shirley Ann Spider in charge of the web as I am to be one of the Spider MSPs. The original web, as the children expressed it, made it really tough for any of those flies to get through. Juliet continued, and I quote, "We now have a looser web where children's rights might not always be so well protected. Although it catches some flies, other flies might sneak through. Even though that web is not so neat, children and young people say it is critical. The very fact that a web exists scares away the flies." For even where this bill is not directly applicable, the provisions of the UNCRC itself are. With the confidence, awareness and cultural change that this bill enables, the children of Scotland and those who support them will have tools to call the UK government to account for the ways in which their actions, especially on immigration, breach those solemn commitments.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I begin once again by drawing attention to the children and young people that are in the gallery today, the human rights detectives, the members of the Children's Parliament, members of the Scottish Youth Parliament, the Children's Commissioners, Young Advisers and Team Scotland, the UN Committee. I would like to sincerely thank them and all those that have gone before them, because this is about you and this is for you, and this is why we are quite rightly elected to our Parliament to represent you. I would also like to thank some adults in the room as well, particularly the children and young people's representatives that are in the public gallery. But I would like to pay particular tribute to my bill team and everyone who has been involved in the reconsideration stage. See, this is a historic day for us as parliamentarians, but more importantly, for Scotland's children and young people, and indeed for all of Scotland, as we take a significant step forward in becoming the country that we want to be, a country where children grow up loved, safe and respected, so that they realise their full potential, and where we respect, protect and fulfil human rights and live free from discrimination. Inalienable human rights to which every human is entitled, and this year will mark the 75th anniversary of its adoption by the UN. Now, the importance of respect for human rights is as important now as it was 75 years ago. We see that in the horrific, unimaginable conflicts across the world today, but also within the UK, with a repugnant Illegal Migration Act, an act which includes a ban on the right to claim asylum, allows for the prolonged detention and removal of children, creates barriers for acquiring nationality, and lacks a consideration of the principle of the best interests of the child. Now, the UNCRC Incorporation Scotland Bill is an important step on Scotland's journey to extend and protect human rights by incorporating treaties that haven't previously been part of our domestic law. This would be a significant achievement for Scotland, indeed, but we are the only devolved nation in the UK to incorporate the Convention into our domestic law, and the only devolved country in the world to incorporate it fully and directly, albeit with some carve-outs to reflect devolved competence.
What, like, so, Happy New Year and all that. I've been meaning to make a video on this for a while, in all honesty, purely because it's something that I've made videos on in the past prior to it being officially, enshrined into Scots law, purely on the basis of what it actually entails, some of what the UNCRC entails. It's as I've said before, it's more or less a red herring, because it sort of green lights, legalises, if anything, a gateway into politicising children, a right to an education. And then when you start to see what they mean by that, global citizenship education and whatnot, it's just very apparent that this is far more sinister than these half-wits would have you believe. I don't really want to spend too much time talking a great deal if I can avoid it. Just head's a bit up my arse at the moment, and kind of just trying to operate as normal despite all of that. And I'll interject where I have to and whatnot, but I think some of the things that I've got in other tabs, this sort of helped to allow for the video to speak for itself. And But I'll just start off with this very briefly. Holyrood passes the revised bill on children's rights after the UK's initial challenge. And it says that the Parliament voted unanimously for Scotland to become the first evolved nation to incorporate the UNCRC into domestic law. The UNCRC grants all people under the age of 18 a comprehensive set of rights, including rights to health, education, family life, play and recreation, and protection from abuse and harm, and sets a legal requirement for all public authorities to comply with them. The bill first passed unanimously back in 2021, but after a challenge from the UK law officers, the Supreme Court ruled that 4 sections required amendment because they went beyond Holyrood's powers. And when you start to look into a lot of the people that have been in favour of this from the start, that in and of itself should make you kind of scratch your head as to what this is really about. Obviously, the additional elephant in the room, why does a bill like this need to exist? Some of the sort of emotional examples that they will conjure up is children seeking asylum or children in care. Well, why not just have specific bills directly targeting those demographics as opposed to a universal bill it's got the United Nations fingerprints all over it? What rights in Scotland did children not have previously that they now do have? This is just a clear-cut example of effectively helping to further the cause of politicising the youth and effectively giving them this false sense of empowerment, which could more or less be interchangeable with entitlement. You know, when it comes to having a right to be listened to and taken seriously when it comes to policy and decision-making from government officials. Explain to me how the fuck a child could have any viable contribution to a political debate. But then, of course, you look a wee bit further into it and you come to find that in order for children to be in a position to provide an opinion on whatever matter it may be, they have to be educated. Isn't that funny? So, like I said, it's effectively just a red herring, really. But this PDF here, for example, just to sort of give a brief summarization for people who aren't exactly aware of what this is or how they describe it anyway. This is from the Scottish Government's website, one of their most recent PDFs on the subject. And if we just come down a wee bit, we'll see what it says. I love this. This is what I'm talking about. Scotland's leading the world in the advancing of children and young people's rights with the incorporation of the UNCRC. Isn't that something? It's so sweet, you know. Thank God for the Scottish Government. The aims of this introductory guidance are to introduce human rights, children's rights, and the UNCRC to those who are less familiar. And this is sort of summarizing this PDF, my mistake. Then we come down to children and young people have the same human rights as adults. These are the same rights to protect everyone, spanning the entire spectrum of civil, political, economic, social, cultural, and environmental rights. Children and young people also have additional rights that recognise that childhood is a special protected time in which children must be allowed to grow, learn, play and develop and flourish with dignity. Why do we need a bill for this? You know, it goes without saying to leave children alone and let kids be kids. And that's the absolute irony of all these wankers in our parliament and the people behind this bill at the United Nations / UNESCO's headquarters, because they cannot leave children alone. So there is a great glaring irony there that I'm sure was not lost on the people who passed this bill. Specific human rights are set out for children are set out in the UNCRC. This offers a vision of the child as an individual and as a member of a family and community. By recognising children's rights in this way, the Convention firmly sets the focus on the whole child, with it being important to be clear that adult and children's rights are equal. There is no hierarchy of human rights, right? So this is some sort of breaking down the barriers between adult and child, you know? We know that children and young people face unique barriers to realizing their rights. The future often depends on the action taken by adults to implement their rights in practice, as children's voices can be unheard or more easily dismissed. For that reason, this bill recognises that children are human beings with fundamental rights that are written into international law, making clear that special action needs to be taken to ensure those rights are respected, protected, and fulfilled. It's just waffle. Very sinister, but waffle all the same, you know? And then we have this section here, kind of elaborates a wee bit on what I was on about earlier on. Do apologise. Just Article 12 of the UNCRC states that every child and young person who is capable of forming his or her own views has the right to express those views freely in all matters affecting him or her, or they or them, with those views being given due weight in accordance with the age and maturity of the child and young person. In order to fulfill the rights under Article 12, where children and young people's views are not known on a matter that is likely to have an impact on them, those delivering public services should take steps to obtain their views. Part 1 Guidance on the Children and Young People Scotland Act 2014 explains in more detail a rights-based duty and expectation in relation to public bodies, including engagement with children and young people. A child or young person's capacity includes, among other things, their ability to understand different choices and make decisions. As children grow and develop, they tend to develop the ability to make more decisions for themselves. In the UNCRC, this is referred to as the child's evolving capacity. Children's capacity develops gradually, and it doesn't happen at the same speed for everyone. It depends on things like a child's experiences, education, emphasis on education, may I add, right? And maturity, as well as the complexity and the magnitude of the decisions being made, right? So, a wee bit further down here. And then this is, for example, I've made videos on this in the past. The annual meeting between the Cabinet and children, right? So once a year, the Scottish Government, members of the Scottish Government go and meet children and young people. And these children and young people are the sort of representatives of all the children and young people across Scotland. And together they provide a few things that they feel that the government should be taking into consideration when it comes to, upcoming policy and decision making and whatnot. So, for example, years gone by at these meetings, the children and young people have come up with suggestions such as more to be done regarding gender equality in education, or anti-racist education, more climate change education, just to name a few. And I wonder where these children and young people, quote unquote, got these ideas to begin with. Their education. So again, it's just problem, reaction, solution in many respects. So this PDF is 26 pages. I'm obviously not going to go through the entirety of it. I'm just seeing if there's anything else of relevance before I move on a bit. I'll read this bit out here, that the government is committed to Scotland being the best place in the world for a child to grow up. The national outcome for children and young people is that children grow up loved, safe and respected so that they reach their full potential. A central part of our vision is the recognition of, respect for and promotion of children's human rights. These include rights to be treated fairly, to be heard and to be as healthy as possible. Our vision is a Scotland where children's human rights are embedded in all aspects of society. A Scotland where policy, law and decision making take account of children's rights and where all children and young people have a voice and are empowered to be human rights defenders. Oh, I just don't know. I really, really don't know. I don't know.
I agree. Looking online, it's hard to find definite answers. And I know it's changing all the time, so it is hard to update and to show where it's going. But I think as well, something that worries me is the fact that not all regulations are working with the UNCRC. It seems crazy to me. I thought the purpose of putting UNCRC into law was to make sure it's respected. And now suddenly there's people are wondering, oh, like, especially people like the police and things like that are there to protect us are wondering when they can disrespect our rights. And it seems it's a bit backwards, I guess. I would probably personally try and talk to someone, whether it was my parents or someone at school. But I know some kids, they don't have that connection with teachers at school or even with their parents or family. So I know some kids would go to look online. So I think it's having that knowledge where it's widespread. What is the UNCRC? How you can report if your rights are being breached, whether it's through school, an anonymous service online, or something like that. I think that's quite important to have it both ways. It should be clear online. Everyone should be able to find out what their rights are. It shouldn't be this big secret where you've got to read through loads of legal documents and read between the lines and check what regulations cover that. It should be clear cut.
I think it's important that schools especially are making it known to children and young people, not just, oh, what their rights are, because I think I was even more fortunate than most schools in Scotland when my primary school like showed us what our rights were. But even then, they did not tell us what that meant for us or how we could stand up for them or what we could do when when our rights were being breached. So I feel like it needs to be more widespread, especially in education, how children value their own rights before adults value their rights. I feel like a lot of the adults that are supposed to be teaching us about our rights, and namely the one thing that comes into mind are like teachers in this instance, they are not really their actions aren't as rights focused as I feel like they could be. A lot of the times they can be like patronizing in a way that kind of makes you feel like, oh well, I'm the adult here and you're the child, so it doesn't really matter what you've got to say because in the end it's just going to be up to me whatever's happening. Do you know what I mean? So it's like I feel like teachers need to take a step back and maybe look at their own actions from a rights-based perspective, and I feel like it should also be implemented and reminded into them for like teacher training and stuff like that. I feel like it should always be there, like, oh, remember this right means that you have to do this, because if you don't do this, then that's kind of your whole job. You know what I mean?
Something I would just add on to the culture change point is that I think in Scotland we're getting better at upholding and understanding children and young people's rights in the most obvious areas like education. But I think for real culture change, we need to be making sure that children and young people's rights are thought about in every area. So it's important for every adult to think about their role and how it impacts children and young people's rights, even if it's maybe not as directly as other people.
When empowerment becomes self-entitlement, that's sort of what impression I get whenever I hear children speak on this issue and young people. Oh, my mistake. Quite frankly, they're children and they're young people. Therefore, when it comes to how much their opinions and their perspectives should be valued, any opinion or perspective that they would tend to have at a young age would be predicated primarily on what they're taught. They're not at ages anywhere near the age where it could be considered that they have the ability to critically think and think for themselves the way that, dare I say, the latter stages of adolescence or adults are concerned. And why should we be holding dear to our hearts the opinions of an 8-year-old child when it comes to politics or societal changes? Any opinion that they may very well have on the issues at hand, as I said, they've been coerced into a specific way of thinking. Do you really think that children's opinions and whatnot would be valued and respected if it ran polar opposite to what they're expected to parrot? If children en masse or specific children even were opposed to, say, for example, the LGBT stuff or climate change education or the climate change narrative, do you really think that their their views would be taken as seriously as the views would be taken as serious from a child who parroted all the correct talking points? And it does play in a bit of a larger issue, which is why I keep referring to this all as a bit of a red herring, because it's giving children this, this feeling of self-empowerment, agency, even making them feel like their voices and their opinions matter and whatnot. And it helps to tie into, as was referenced earlier on in the document, human rights defenders. They're becoming politicized and they don't even realize it, funnily enough, because they're too young and naive to realize they're being politicized, they're being propagandized, and they're being led to believe that the things that they come out with as a result of are to be respected and upheld and valued. They're just effectively becoming little activists. So there's that.
Question 3. What sort of changes do you think the UNCRC Scotland Bill will make to the lives of children and young people in Scotland? How soon do you think these changes might take place?
I think the change is definitely going to be gradual. But I think if it is up there and children are now aware, oh, my rights do matter enough to be put into law, then they're going to start valuing themselves more and valuing the way that they're treated and the way that adults especially treat them. And I think that's just going to be a big, almost pick up for our generation to make us feel as if we are heard and valued as people, not just as children.
It will be a gradual process, as Mima says, and I understand UNCRC impacts every aspect of children's lives, and also the people who are working with children and everyone in the street, because everyone has interactions with children in one way or another. So I understand it's a huge task to try and change everyone's lifestyle and to have it more involved in school curriculums, in the justice sector. And I know it will be gradual, but I do also hope that it's not too gradual. I do hope that we will start to see change, especially with the way they're trying to change the SQA and for the police sector, how they interact with kids. I hope that changes as well to a more positive way.
That are children and youth friendly and designed in a way that children and people can understand them, because I think that the idea that we don't understand it shouldn't be okay, they don't understand it, let's leave them out the conversation. It should be how do we actually create communications that mean that they understand it. So
I think it should be better for people who live in poverty, young children and young people who live in poverty, and children should be treated fairly at school by teachers and pupils, especially the adults.
yeah, I think in terms of how long the change is going to take, that it's really over to the Parliament and the government now to sort of create this implementation programme and really prioritise implementation of the bill. And although some of the long-term culture change will take a while, that change needs to start now. And that if we have a generation of children and young people who have their rights respected, they'll become adults who respect and value children's rights, and that will help the longer term culture change as well. And so that's why it's really important that although some of these changes might take a while to be implemented, that it starts as soon as possible.
So I just want to bring this up purely because it's quite important. I know I've talked about this before in the past, but the General Teaching Council for Scotland, they are more or less are the law equivalent. In an educational setting, they are law, more or less. Their professional standards are the equivalent of law. Thus, teachers must adhere to these principles and these standards when it comes to how they undertake their job, right? It says here that the professional standards for Scotland's teachers describe teaching professionalism in Scotland. Teachers' way of being. A refreshed and restructured professional standards was enacted on the 2nd of August 2021 and can be viewed below. The professional standards support and promote partnership, leadership, and inquiry and professional learning and have multiple purposes, right? So I'm just going to come to this tab, give you a wee bit of insight as to the sort of shit Being a teacher in Scotland, right? Our increasingly interconnected and rapidly changing world faces many social, environmental, and economic challenges, and an effective, responsive, and inclusive education system is vital if we are to address these. Engaged, reflective, and empowered skilled teachers and learners acknowledge Scotland's place in the world, our history, our differences and diversity, our unique natural environment, our cultural base, and social justice. Scotland's teachers help to embed sustainable and socially just practices in order to flourish as a nation. Sorry. So it says here that these standards outline what it means to become, to grow as a teacher in Scotland, with a commitment to the professional values of social justice, trust and respect and integrity being at the heart of the professional standards. Okay. So just come down to these professional values, right? Social justice is the view that everyone deserves equal economic, political, and social rights and opportunities. Right? Promoting health and well-being of self, colleagues, and the children and young people in my care. Building and fostering positive relationships in the learning community which are respectful of individuals. Embracing global education and social values of sustainability, equality, equity, justice, and recognizing children's rights. Respecting the rights of all learners as outlined in the UNCRC and their entitlement to be included in decisions regarding their learning experience and have all aspects of their well-being developed and supported. Demonstrating a commitment to engaging learners in real-world issues to enhance learning experiences and outcomes and to encourage learning our way to a better future, right? A commitment to social justice through fair, transparent, inclusive and sustainable policies and practice in relation to protected characteristics, valuing as well as respecting social, ecological, cultural, religious and racial diversity and promoting the principles and practices of sustainable development and local and global citizenship for all learners. Demonstrating a commitment to motivating and including all learners, understanding the influence of gender, social, cultural, racial, ethnic, religious and economic backgrounds on experiences of learning, taking account of specific learning needs and seeking to reduce barriers. Demonstrating a commitment to supporting learners who are experiencing or who have experienced trauma, children and young people from a care experience background, and understanding responsibilities as a corporate parent. A corporate parent. Okay? Understanding and challenging discrimination in all its forms, particularly the way which is defined by the Equality Act. Promoting and engendering a rights respecting culture and the ethical use of authority associated with one's professional roles. Acting and behaving in a way that develops a culture of trust and respect for self, others, and the natural world. Understanding and acknowledging and respecting the contribution of others in positively influencing the lives of learners. Respecting individual differences and supporting learners' understanding of themselves, others, and their contribution to the development and sustainability of a diverse and inclusive society. Okay? Like, what's going on in schools is repugnant, repulsive, and dare I say fucking egregious, really. But it sort of helps to paint a picture as to sort of what's happening to children, the environments that they're in. Therefore, with these new and improved laws and rights that they're going to have, where they have a right to be listened to and taken seriously, when that's the sort of environment that is festering in the background, it's not really difficult to conclude from that. Not difficult to see how I've come to the conclusion that what you're now going to start seeing is politicized children demanding action and political change in specific directions, and they have to be listened to and taken seriously.
Education and literacy, problem solving, application of numeracy and digital literacy.
The globe icon is not part of the skills framework, but represents the need to develop global citizenship fostered by a global perspective. Right? This is from Education Scotland, Stirling Council, Young Leaders of Learning. Okay. This is the sort of shit that children are investing their time in nowadays, courtesy of their corporate parents. Yes. Isn't that
Meant, Pamela, that you weren't hearing anything. Sorry, I'll send the links to these videos out afterwards as well, and I'll maybe have a wee play about with my settings for when it comes to the next one. Okay, perfect. So we're just going to have a wee kind of recap on some of the things that were mentioned in the video there. So the UNCRC has 54 articles, and that can be split into 3 kind of key parts. So part 1 to 42 are the provisions, and they're the articles that provide things. So things like access to education, access to healthcare, access to play. All of those articles are contained within that part 1. Part 2 is around the implementation and the monitoring. So that's thinking about how governments can implement and monitor the kind of provisions within the UNCRC. And then part 3 is the final clauses. So again, like that, kind of pulling everything together and making sure that these are implemented. So we'll have 5 kind of keywords that we think are really helpful when we're thinking about the UNCRC and kind of human rights more broadly as well. So these all relate to children's rights, but also human rights more broadly. So the UNCRC applies to all children. It's completely universal, regardless of race, religion, abilities, family circumstances, and anything else. So just like all people everywhere in the world are entitled to human rights, all children everywhere are entitled to their own child's rights. And they apply regardless of anything else. You don't need to have done anything to have your rights, and they can't be taken away from you. We could possibly go into the detail of every single article, but these are the kind of 4 general principles that underpin everything else. So these articles can really be seen as the kind of gateway rights. If these ones aren't in place, anything else won't probably be able to be in place either. So Article 2 covers that kind of universal element. The Convention on the Rights of the Child applies to absolutely everyone. Article 3 relates to the best interests of the child and thinks about how the best interests of the child must be top priority in all things that affect children. Article 6 is about survival and development, and this is one that I was really thinking about yesterday, just with everything that's going on in the world. How well are we doing with this at the moment? Every child has a right to life. Governments must do all they can to ensure that children survive and develop to their full potential. And Article 12, respect for the views of the child. Some people might be really familiar with this article. It states that every child has the right to say what they think in all matters affecting them and have their views taken seriously. Landscape in Scotland, the UNCRC and children's rights more broadly is really woven through a lot of the policy and the kind of frameworks that we use in Scotland. Children's rights is really front and centre of quite a lot of these. Sure, you'll all be aware of GIRFEC and one of the key kind of policy documents of putting children at the centre to plan, assess and put interventions around them using the Shinari indicators. There's a wee image there of the Attainment Challenge, which the refresh of that focused a bit more on achievement rather than just kind of that kind of attainment. So thinking about the young person more broadly, child. So they linked all of the articles. You'll see there in the active, they've got Article 31 about the right to play. So lots and lots of the articles also cross over between 2 or 3, which in a longer session can have some good discussion about why that is and lots of the kind of intricacies. A wee bit more globally, these are the Sustainable Development Goals, which some people might be familiar with. Some people, again, might be a bit new to looking at rights through this kind of sustainable lens. But these were adopted by all members of the UN in 2015, and the aim was to provide a kind of shared blueprint that's about peace and prosperity for people and the planet, and really aiming to 2030, which isn't that far away now, are these 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And they were quite an urgent call for all countries, both kind of developed countries and developing countries in this kind of global partnership, recognising that ending poverty and other deprivations go hand in hand with health, education, reducing inequality and supporting economic growth. So lots of things you'll see there relate to our work in CLD really broadly, things around access to education, zero hunger, equalities, reducing inequalities, no poverty, lots and lots of the global goals relate to what we do in our sector.
Education. Yeah, it's all interlinked. And I think what's most vital as far as education and children are concerned is Sustainable Development Goal 4. Quality education. But more specifically, this is described as ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Right? But the targets, one in particular, where it says education for sustainable development and global citizenship. By 2030, ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, among others, through education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, promotion of a culture of peace and nonviolence, global citizenship, the appreciation of diversity, and of culture's contribution to sustainable development. So, it's funny how it all interlinks, you know? Be under no illusion, the vast majority of Scottish education nowadays centres around two things: global citizenship education and sustainable development education, or more specifically, learning for sustainability. So, as I've tried to get across a few times throughout the duration of this video, politicized children making decisions or demanding change and whatnot because of their skewed views on the world around them due to the fucking propagandization process that's taking place as we speak. And it's enshrined in law now that they have to learn this way. And then when they start to make noise because they feel empowered and entitled to do so, they have to be listened to and taken seriously. Telling you, man, it's a red fucking herring. And on that note, I'm done. I do apologise that I'm not all together there with that at the moment. Just stuff going on in my personal life. And it's not a great start to the year, put it that way. And I hope that your year goes better than mine's going so far. Peace.